What if the dented tin lunchbox shoved to the back of your hall closet, the one your kid carried to third grade and never touched again, is worth more than the appliances in your kitchen? 10 old metal lunchboxes have quietly sold for hundreds, thousands, and in one case, $31,000. And the one most of you actually own is sitting at number one. Let's find out tonight if it's in your house. Here is the truth almost nobody understands about tin lunchboxes. The character on the front is not the value. Real money hides in a handful of details most people never think to check. Who manufactured the box? Whether the original thermos is still inside it? What year the show it was based on went off the air? And whether that box survived 40 years of school cafeterias without a single spot of rust breaking through the lithography. If yours has been sitting in a closet since the Carter administration, dismissed as a piece of childhood junk your daughter outgrew, that is not carelessness on your part. Nobody ever taught you to flip the box over and read what the tin is actually telling you. Tonight, somebody will. We start at number 10. Number 10, the promotional giveaway that was never sold in stores. Somewhere in a basement or a grandmother's kitchen cabinet, there is a small tin lunchbox with an elephant on it. Not a famous elephant from a movie or a television show, just an elephant, a cartoon mascot named Toppy, short for Top Value, who was used by Kroger grocery stores in the 1950s to promote their Top Value Stamps rewards program. The box was never available for purchase. You could not walk into a store and buy one. It was handed out as a prize for collecting enough stamps, and most of them were used, battered, and thrown away within a year. Here is where the money hides. Because the Toppy lunchbox was a promotional item with a limited production run and no retail distribution, surviving examples are among the rarest in the entire hobby. A 1957 Toppy the Elephant lunchbox with its original thermos sold on eBay for $4,500. That is not a typo. $4,500 for a promotional grocery store giveaway that most families tossed in the trash 60 plus years ago. I have watched collectors describe the Toppy as one of the 5 rarest lunchboxes in existence. If you have one, it probably has no sentimental attachment to any movie or show because it was never based on one. That is exactly why most people threw it away. And that is exactly why it is worth what it is. Number 9, the box from the show that lasted one season. Here is a pattern most people never connect, and it is one of the most reliable rules in the entire hobby. The shorter the television show's run, the fewer lunchboxes were produced, and the rarer the survivors become. A show that ran for 8 seasons had 8 years of lunchbox production behind it. A show that was cancelled after a single season had one production run, maybe two, and then the boxes stopped. Here is the part that surprises people. An underdog lunchbox from 1974, based on the animated series that had modest ratings and a limited cultural footprint, sold on eBay in September 2024 for $4,789. A Dudley Do-Right box from Aladdin Industries, based on a segment of the Rocky and Bullwinkle show that most children today have never heard of, was offered at over $2,000. These are not household names anymore. That is the point. The lunchboxes from beloved, long-running, heavily merchandised franchises were produced in huge quantities and are everywhere. The ones from obscure, short-lived, quickly forgotten shows are the ones that disappeared, and disappearance is what creates value in this market. Number 8, the dome top from the early 1960s. Most people picture a lunchbox as a flat-topped rectangle, but in the late 1950s and early 1960s, several manufacturers produced a different shape entirely, a rounded dome top that curved upward like a miniature worker's lunch pail. The dome top boxes were harder to stack, harder to store, and less popular with retailers, which means they were produced in smaller numbers and discarded more aggressively than their flat-topped cousins. Here is where the shape becomes money. A 1963 Jetsons dome-top lunchbox from Aladdin Industries, with its curved lid and bright futuristic graphics, has sold for over $2,600 in excellent condition with its matching thermos. The dome shape is the first thing experienced collectors look for when they walk into an estate sale because it tells them the box is from a narrow window of production, roughly 1957 to 1963, that overlaps almost perfectly with the golden age of character lunchboxes. A flat top box from the same era in the same condition might bring half as much, simply because flat tops were made by the millions. If you open a closet and find a lunchbox with a curved lid, do not set it down until you have looked at the bottom. Before we get to the top 7, there is something about all of this that most people never quite put together, and it is the reason so many valuable lunchboxes end up at yard sales for a quarter. The boxes worth real money almost never look like money. They sit in basements, in attic boxes, in garbage bags headed for the curb, passed over because someone decided they were rusty, outdated, or just kid stuff. But the character on the front was never the thing. What separates a $5 yard sale box from a $5,000 auction piece is a short list of physical clues. The manufacturer's stamp on the bottom, whether the matching thermos is still inside, the shape of the box, the condition of the lithography, and whether the show it depicted had a long run or was cancelled before Christmas. Almost no one is ever taught to check those things. That is the whole reason these boxes keep walking out the door for nothing. Number 7, the matching thermos that doubles the price. This is the single most underestimated factor in the entire hobby, and it is the one that costs sellers the most money. Inside most vintage metal lunchboxes was a matching glass-lined thermos bottle, decorated with the same character art as the box itself, held in place by a small wire bracket or a fitted slot in the base. Here is the rule. A lunchbox with its original matching thermos is worth roughly double to triple what the box alone commands. In many cases, the thermos is worth more than the box by itself, and here is where it hurts. The glass liner inside the thermos was fragile. Children dropped them. The liner shattered. The thermos was thrown away. The box survived, but the thermos did not, and that single missing piece cuts the value in half or worse. Before you sell, before you price, before you even list a vintage lunchbox, open it and look inside. If the thermos is there, check whether the glass liner is intact by gently shaking it. If it rattles, the glass is broken and the thermos is decorative only. If it does not rattle, you may be holding a complete kit, and complete kits are what drive the serious numbers. I have watched sellers list a box alone for $40 when the thermos sitting in the next drawer would have made it a $400 set. Check the closet, check the drawer, reunite them. Number 6, the manufacturer's stamp on the bottom. Flip any vintage metal lunchbox over and look at the bottom panel. Somewhere in the tin, usually stamped or printed in small type, you will find a manufacturer's name, and that name tells you more about the box's history than the character on the front. Here is the shortlist that matters. Aladdin Industries, based in Nashville, Tennessee, was one of the two dominant manufacturers, and their boxes are marked with the Aladdin name, often with a model number and a date. King Sealy Thermos, which eventually became simply Thermos, was the other giant, and they stamped their boxes with the King Sealy name through the 1970s. Universal and ADCO Liberty made some of the earliest and rarest character boxes in the 1950s, including the legendary 1954 Superman lunchbox that recently sold at auction for $31,000. Ohio Art and OK Industries produced smaller runs that are now harder to find. The manufacturer tells you the era, the likely production volume, and sometimes the exact year. And here is the detail almost nobody catches. After Aladdin and King Sealy consolidated the market in the 1960s, the earlier boxes from smaller manufacturers like ADCO Liberty and Universal became dramatically rarer because those companies simply stopped making lunchboxes. An early Universal box in strong condition is a different animal than an Aladdin box from 1978, even if the character on the front is more recognizable. Number 5. The reproduction wearing a vintage costume. Here is the uncomfortable truth that nobody selling a lunchbox wants to hear. Starting in the 1990s and continuing through the 2000s, companies began manufacturing replica tin lunchboxes designed to look like vintage originals. Some were marketed openly as nostalgic reproductions, others were not. Here is how you tell them apart with your hands and your eyes. An original vintage lunchbox from the 1950s, 60s, or 70s was made from lithographed steel, and the print was baked directly into the metal during manufacturing. The graphics are part of the tin itself. A reproduction often uses a thinner gauge of metal, and the print quality is noticeably sharper and cleaner than a genuine vintage piece because it was produced with modern printing technology. The colours look too perfect, the edges are too crisp, and the inside of the box is the biggest tell. Original vintage boxes often have a bare metal interior, sometimes with a wire thermos bracket and a slightly rough finish. Reproductions frequently have a smooth, painted, or lacquered interior that looks modern. Check the bottom for a copyright date or a modern manufacturer's name. And feel the weight. Vintage lithographed steel is heavier and more rigid than the thinner tin used in most replicas. If it feels light and the graphics look like they were printed yesterday, it was. Number 4. The rust test that takes 10 seconds. Here is a trick that experienced collectors actually use, and you can run it right now with nothing but your eyes and your fingertip. Pick up the lunchbox and look at 3 specific spots. First, the area directly under the handle where fingers gripped and moisture collected. Second, the bottom corners where the box sat on wet cafeteria tables. Third, the hinge where the lid meets the body. These 3 spots are where rust always starts, and rust on a vintage lunchbox is not just cosmetic damage, it is a value destroyer. Here is the scale that collectors use, roughly graded from C1 to C10. A C10 is mint, never used, still has its original tags. A C8 is excellent, with bright graphics, minimal wear, and no rust. A C5 is average, noticeable wear, maybe some small scratches. Below C5, the value falls off a cliff. A box with even a quarter-sized patch of rust breaking through the lithography drops hard because the rust tells a collector that the tin is compromised and the damage will spread. Run your fingertip under the handle. Look at the corners. Check the hinge. If those 3 spots are clean, your box just survived the test that eliminates most of them. Number 3. The name scratched into the paint. This is the one that divides the hobby, and I owe you the honest truth about it. Many vintage lunchboxes have a child's name scratched, written in marker, or engraved into the paint somewhere on the surface. A mother labelled it so her son would not lose it at school. Here is the tension. On a common box, a name scratched into the surface is a flaw that lowers the value. On a genuinely rare box, a name barely matters because the rarity overrides the cosmetic damage. And on certain boxes, a name can even add a small amount of provenance and charm if the box is being sold as a genuine childhood artifact from the era. But here is the line. A name scratched through the lithography on the front panel, damaging the character artwork, is always a downgrade. A name on the inside of the lid, written in pencil or light marker, is far less damaging and sometimes invisible when the box is displayed. The location of the mark matters as much as the mark itself. If you find a rare box with a name on it, do not try to remove it. Scrubbing or sanding will destroy more of the lithography than the name itself did. Leave it, disclose it, and let the rarity speak for itself. Number 2. The year everything stopped. This is the detail that puts every metal lunchbox into historical context, and most people have never heard it. In 1985, the last metal lunchbox was manufactured in the United States. The design was based on an action movie character, and it was made by Aladdin Industries. After that, every school lunchbox produced in America was plastic. The reason was a wave of parental concern in the early 1980s that children were using the rigid metal boxes as weapons on the playground. Several states considered banning them. Manufacturers, facing declining sales and regulatory pressure, switched to plastic and never looked back. Here is what that means for your closet. If you have a metal lunchbox with a character on it, it was made before 1986. which means it is at minimum 40 years old. And the further back you go from that 1985 cutoff, the older the box, the smaller the surviving population, and the higher the potential value. The Golden Age, roughly 1950 to 1970, produced the boxes that collectors fight over. The late 70s and early 80s produced the boxes that most families still have. And 1985 drew the line. Everything metal is vintage now. Not everything vintage is valuable, but nothing plastic from that era comes close. Which brings us to the lunchbox almost every one of you actually has. Number 1, the plain metal lunch pail with no character on it at all. If you grew up in America, or if your father or grandfather worked a trade, there is a very good chance you have seen a simple, undecorated metal lunchbox somewhere in the house. A plain black dome top, a red plaid pattern, a solid-coloured industrial pail with a wire handle that a steel worker or a carpenter carried to a job site every morning for 20 years. You may have glanced at it and assumed it was worth nothing, because there is no cartoon character, no television show, no nostalgia attached to it. Just a box a working man used to carry a sandwich and a thermos of coffee. So let me tell you the honest truth, because I respect you too much not to. On today's market, a standard plain metal lunch pail from the 1950s or 60s changes hands for $10 to $30. The collector market for character boxes does not usually extend to generic industrial pails, and the younger buyers are chasing the pop culture nostalgia, not the blue-collar history. That is the hard floor. But here is the other half, and it is why this one sits at number 1. Not every plain pail is plain. The earliest examples, the Depression-era oval tins from the 1930s that predated the character box craze entirely, are genuine antiques that rarely surface at all. A 1935 oval tin pail with a licensed character, the very first of its kind, manufactured by Goyder, Peschke and Frey, originally retailed for 10 or 15 cents during the Depression, and surviving examples in good condition have been valued at over $2,000. And the industrial pails from the 40s and early 50s, the ones with the dome tops and the heavy gauge steel that a man carried to a factory floor, represent the last generation of lunchboxes that were built purely to work and not to sell a show. And notice what just decided the value, not the character, not the nostalgia. It was the manufacturer, the era, the shape, and the condition. The exact 4 things you just learned to check on every lunchbox before this one. That is the whole secret of the closet. The cartoon on the front never set the price. The maker, the era, the thermos, and the condition did. And now you can read all 4. So before you toss a single lunchbox into the donation pile, before you let one go at the next garage sale for whatever a picker offers, do the thing almost nobody does. Flip it over and read the manufacturer's stamp. Open it and check for the thermos. Look under the handle, at the corners, and along the hinge for rust. Feel the weight of the tin. The value in old metal lunchboxes was never the character smiling on the front. It was the company that stamped the tin, the year it was made, the thermos that came with it, and whether 40 years of cafeteria tables were kind to the lithography. Those 4 things do not care whether your grandchildren think the box is just an old tin. In years of watching these pieces cross tables and auction blocks, the saddest words I hear are, "I had no idea what it was, so I sold the whole box of them for $2. You do not have to be that person. Do not clear out that closet until you have checked the bottom of every box, not one.